Making homemade candy does not have to be hard, and a perfect example are these pecan caramel clusters. Look at that caramel. It is amazing. I'm going to show you how to make them step by step. There are 3 processes to this recipe, but each one is super easy to do. So please don't get overwhelmed. We're going to go through it one at a time. First thing we want to do is toast our pecans. For this, you're going to want 4 ounces or about 1 cup of halved pecans. Now, if you have pecans that are already chopped up, that's perfectly fine. Just measure out 4 ounces, but the volume measurement would be different. Then we want a frying pan on the stove, and we're going to toast them up over medium heat. The pecans are going to take about 5 to 7 minutes to toast up, and then we're going to put them on a cooling rack to cool completely. Meanwhile, I'm going to set up my Ninja Foodi, which I love using as a double boiler to melt some chocolate. I have 4 cups of water in the Ninja Foodi. We're going to turn the Foodi on, hit sear saute, it defaults to high, and hit start. Don't add your chocolate yet, okay? We don't want to overheat the chocolate at all, or it tends to get a little bit too thick. What you're gonna want for this recipe, and I've changed this up from my other dipping chocolate recipe because I found that I wanted these to be a little bit harder of a chocolate. So I'm using a 2-to-1 ratio, meaning 2 parts of the melting wafers to 1 part of chocolate chips, and this is by weight, not volume, okay? Now, if you don't like dark chocolate, you don't have to use dark chocolate. You can use milk chocolate. It'll be perfectly fine. The process is the same. All right, now, while your pecans are toasting, you're gonna give them a stir a few times. Now I'm starting to see some steam and the bottom of the bowl is warm. So now we want to switch over to a slow cook on low. This is very important because if you stay on sear saute on high or even on low, it's going to overheat the mixing bowl too much, okay? So let's switch functions, slow cook, go down to low, hit start. Now 8 hours, we obviously don't need 8 hours. We can now adjust this time down to 15 minutes and let it go. These are the Ghirardelli dark chocolate, which I really, really love. 8 ounces, 4 ounces of the dark chocolate chips. What's gonna happen after the 15 minutes of slow cook? They're going to be almost melted, but then it's gonna automatically switch over to keep warm, and it will hold your chocolate at the perfect temperature for dipping for hours and hours and hours. So we're just gonna keep letting those go and stir periodically, okay? About every 3 to 5 minutes. Meanwhile, we just have another minute or so left on the pecans. You're gonna know your pecans are done when you can start to smell them and they darken just a little bit. Nuts can go from perfectly toasted to burnt very quickly, so pay attention at this point, and I think ours are ready, so I'm gonna put them on the cooling rack. Now, when your pecans first come out, they're gonna be soft. Like if you bit into one, don't worry. As they cool, they're going to become hard again, and then we're going to chop them up. So these can go away, and we're gonna concentrate on our chocolate, and then we're gonna make our caramel. The chocolate's already starting to melt a little bit, so that's wonderful. Now we're gonna let the Ninja Foodi do its thing, stay on slow cook, switch over to keep warm. Meanwhile, we're gonna make our caramel. Today we're making a dry caramel, meaning that we make the caramel out of white granulated sugar and nothing else, so no liquids go in at this point. The important thing to think about when you're gonna decide on what type of cooking vessel you're gonna use to make your caramel is you want at least an 8 or 9 inch cooking surface. So my frying pan works perfectly for this. It can be a stainless steel, non-stick, it doesn't really matter. As long as it can get up to, high temperatures on the stove, you'll be fine. You're gonna put in 1 cup of sugar and spread it evenly over the bottom. Now you might see a few specks of dark in my frying pan, and that is just because I wiped out this pan because it's the same one I used to toast the pecans. That is not going to affect anything. There's a few little pecan skins still left over. So with the dried caramel, you're gonna stir every minute or so until you start to see the sugar rocks forming. And it is amazing to watch. I love making dry caramel, and I think once you try it, you're gonna find it's the easiest type of caramel to make. Once the sugar rocks start to form, you're gonna stir constantly, and as the sugar rocks start to melt, you're gonna see the liquid start to turn an amber color, and then it's gonna deepen. That is the caramel forming. So we're gonna stir constantly until all of the sugar rocks have fully melted. Once all the sugar rocks have melted and you have a nice amber looking liquid, you've made your caramel. But right now it's very brittle. So in order to get it to the consistency that we want for the pecan clusters, we're gonna add in 3 tablespoons of salted or unsalted butter. You're gonna add in 5 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream. Mix that well until it's incorporated and you have now what looks like a caramel sauce. Then add in 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, not paste, or you'll have dark specks going through your caramel and it does not look appealing. And then add in just a pinch of salt, stir that, and remove from the heat. All right, we have our pecans that are toasted and they are already cooled down. You're just gonna take a knife and roughly go through them. Now, if you wanted to keep your pecans whole because you wanna make the traditional turtle candy, which is basically 3 half pecans on a pan, on a sheet pan, that's perfectly fine. You can leave them whole. I prefer the texture when they're roughly chopped. You can chop them as fine as you want or as chunky as you want. It's totally up to you. All right, that looks perfect. Now, you may ask, Louise, why don't you chop them up and then toast them? You can do that too. The reason why I don't do it that way is because I tend to get distracted very easily, and when they're chopped up, they tend to burn very quickly. So I like to keep them in the halves and then chop them up, and the flavor, really, I haven't noticed any difference, but you do it whichever way you want, okay? The next thing you want to do is get your trays set up. So this makes no difference what size you use, okay? The size will depend on how many you can fit on the tray at once, but it doesn't matter what size they are. Cut a piece of parchment that roughly fits and put it on top of the tray. These are half pan size, okay? Now, if you're having issues with your edges kind of lifting up, just dot the tray with a tiny bit of butter, and I just use the butter that I cut off that I need for the caramel. And do that on each corner. That will help hold your parchment paper down. And I find it helpful, especially in this recipe. All right, so now the tray is prepared. Smooth it all out. And now we are gonna put about 1/2 of a tablespoon of the pecans in little clusters on the tray. You can go up to 1 tablespoon, and let me show you the difference in size. So these are the 1/2 tablespoon size. And they get pretty big, okay? They're a little bit bigger than a quarter, okay? They're a good size. I think these are the perfect size. But if you want colossal, palm size ones, then you're gonna use 1 tablespoon of pecans per cluster. If you use 1 tablespoon, you will get 12 pecan clusters out of this recipe. If you use the 1/2, you're gonna get 24. You're gonna wanna keep these clusters of pecans about 3 inches apart. And that way, when we pour the caramel over top, it has a little bit of room to kind of expand over the edges, but you're not gonna have the caramel touch each other between the clusters. Now, you'll notice that there's a few little kind of crumbs left over, if you will, and I don't throw them away because if you are going to take these caramel pecan clusters to some sort of an event, I like to put a little dusting of the pecans on top to let people know that they are nut-filled, okay, because there's so many nut allergies out there. All right, let's check in on our chocolate because it is very slowly over low heat melting, and we want to give it a stir periodically, but that looks good. Now it's time to put the caramel on top of the toasted pecans. You do not need to be in a rush with this, and I urge you not to be in a rush, okay? If you have a stove that can stay on very, very, very low, you can keep your caramel on a very low heat. However, we have enough time, even off the heat, to get it onto these pecan clusters. If you do it when the caramel's too hot, it's gonna really spread. So I like to sort of let it cool down just a little bit. The other thing is, you may have noticed I used a wooden spoon making the caramel. That is because of the way metal conducts heat to the sugar mixture that can mess things up. So I recommend using a wooden spoon for making the caramel, but I use a metal spoon which cools the mixture down to put this on top so we have less spread. Any type of metal spoon, a measuring spoon, or a soup spoon will work fine. You're gonna put about a tablespoon of caramel on each one, but you know what? You do not need to be exact, okay? There's a few ways that you can set up your workstation, so to speak, okay? You can move your pan over to your counter and put it on a hot pad, or if you want to, you can pour your caramel mixture into a glass bowl. And the deeper the bowl, so the less width and deeper, it's gonna keep your caramel hot a little bit longer. So either way is perfectly fine. I'm gonna go straight out of the saute pan, but I may switch up halfway through if I notice that the caramel's getting too thick to work with. So I have my 1 tablespoon measuring spoon, and I'm just gonna go right in and grab some of this, and it looks like it's a good consistency right now. And then we're gonna pour it, try to stay in the middle, and then drizzle it over. We're gonna put 1 layer on, and then with any leftovers, we'll come back and do another layer. So make sure you get the caramel over all of the pecans, or when you go to dip them in chocolate, the pecans are gonna fall off, okay? All right, last one, and we are down to a very little caramel. If you need to reheat, you can reheat again. There's no problems with that. I'm just gonna kind of scrape. You can see I also got another little utensil out to kind of help me scrape it enough to get it into the spoon, and we'll finish the last one. Now, if you don't want to go through this, worried about running out of caramel, you can make more. Okay, so you don't have to just make 1 cup. You can make 1.5 cups of sugar and then just, increase the other ingredients accordingly. You can do this recipe up to 3 cups of sugar. Same process, okay? No issues with that. Sometimes with making candy, you don't want to increase the amounts because it messes up the cooking time. But with this recipe, 3 cups of sugar in that size frying pan works fine. I do it all the time. It just takes a little bit longer, obviously, because you still have to make sure that all your sugar rocks form and that they melt, and that just takes a little bit longer, a little more stirring. We are doing this, though. Look at this. We are getting this. Now, there's still a little caramel left in that pan, and I'm not one for wasting anything, especially something as delicious as caramel. So, this is what we do. Take a little extra cream. This is about 1/3 cup. Pour it into your saucepan. Put it back over the heat. Get all the caramel off the spoons. Heat it up over low heat, and you're gonna have delicious caramel cream for your coffee. And there you have it, a little bit, probably about 1/4 cup of caramel cream. It will never harden, it will never set up. It is perfect for adding to your coffee. Or pour it on top of ice cream. That would be delicious too. All right, so now for the pecan clusters, you can do 1 or 2 things. You can put them in the refrigerator for a few minutes, or you can go right into dipping. Sometimes, depending on the temperature of your house and things like that, sometimes the caramel will be too soft and you'll notice it as soon as it hits the chocolate will start to bend a little bit. That is your sign that you need to put your tray in the refrigerator to chill. But we're gonna go right into dipping these and see how they go, because I would just rather get it done and then we can let them set up at room temperature. This process needs to be done fairly quickly. You don't want your pecan caramel clusters to sit in the warm chocolate for any length of time. It is a quick dip in the chocolate bath, okay? What I like to do is use some sort of a metal spatula just to release them. See, oh, you know what? I can tell already. Look at that. Okay. If you see that, you need to refrigerate. So these are gonna pop in the refrigerator just for about 5 minutes. All right, now they have chilled for a few minutes and we can lift them up. What I like to do is take them and put them top side down first, and then take a fork, kind of dip them, turn them, lift them up, let the excess chocolate drip off, then we're gonna put it right back onto the same sheet pan. Just like that. And then we repeat that for all of them. Usually I let these set up at room temperature and they're gonna take a couple of hours for the chocolate to really harden, and it keeps a really nice shine. However, you can pop them into the refrigerator for 5 or 10 minutes to speed up the process. And I'm gonna go ahead and do that with this tray. All right, there we go. They're all dipped. Now, if you wanted to put those little crumbs on top, you would do that now before the chocolate sets. So you just put a few right on top, the pecan crumbs, I guess I'm gonna call them pecan pieces is probably a better word. The other thing you can do, if you didn't want extra pecans on top, you can put a little bit of salt on top. And I have a little bit of Malden salt flakes here that look really pretty on top. Not too many though, or you'll have a little salty caramel. But there we go. So now we let this set up, and then you can store them at room temperature for a couple of weeks, but you want to make sure they're in an airtight container, fully set, okay? And then you're gonna layer them in a Tupperware container. Make sure that you have a piece of parchment in between each layer. Store them at room temperature. Or you can freeze them for longer storage. You can store them in the refrigerator for several weeks, but you want to serve them room temperature. So before you serve them, bring them out, let them warm up, because if they come right out of the refrigerator, you're not gonna get that ooey gooey caramel. You're gonna have a little bit firmer of a caramel. Now these were just in the refrigerator for a few minutes, but I can touch them. They're not leaving, my fingerprint on top. So I'm gonna go ahead and open one up for you guys. But ordinarily I would let them set up for several hours at room temperature. But here we go. Look at that. Oh my gosh. We just made the best pecan caramel clusters. 3 different steps to the recipe, all very easy. Take your time, make your homemade candy, and enjoy it. So delicious.